Hello, citizens of YouTube land.
Hey.
It's your president and your VP, and we're back once again with another video. But if you want to become a citizen of YouTube land and you haven't already, all you have to do is hit that subscription button below.
Or click the Dr. Pepper can. Actually, I'm just kidding. Don't actually do that.
And a very special shout out to all the fathers, stepfathers, foster fathers, fatherly figures, adopted fathers out there. It is Father's Day. It is June 20th. So, celebration of all fathers and happy Father's Day to you guys out there.
Yep.
Today's video, the first of many that we're going to probably try to get done today, is of Mice and Men, the 1939 version, starring Burgess Meredith and Lon Chaney Jr.
This is definitely an I love this movie. If we were to do the remake, though, Dad, it'd probably be an I hate this movie because of that ending.
Yeah, we'll get to all that. We'll get to all that. It has an incredible...
I got it.
It has an incredible 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now,
this is the first time that we actually agree with Rotten Tomatoes.
Now, we normally don't talk about Rotten Tomatoes too much. We do throw it out there for those of you who are interested in it, but we don't usually take those things with a grain of salt because it is what it is, and we're not even really professional film critics. We are who we are. But let's get right down to it. So, Mice and Men starts with George and Lenny running from a mob of men. And they hop aboard a train. And they're on their way to their next work detail because it is the Depression and they have to move from job to job just to get by, just to survive.
Mm-hmm. And
that's all these boys are doing is they're just getting by. They're just surviving. George looks after Lenny. Lenny is slow. He's, I have to put it as bluntly as I can here, guys. I can't mince around the facts. He's slow. He's not mentally ill, though, and he's not the R word, okay? Because that's a horrible word.
He's not that. They call him dumb, they call him everything else, but in all honesty, he has a mind of a child.
So they're
in a man's body.
They're on their way to their next work detail, and George gets a little impatient and asks the driver how far it is, and the driver kind of gets a little snippy with them and tells him it's just a short distance up the road. Turns out it was 10 miles up the road and they had to walk the whole way. They make their camp that night at by the river, and Lenny asks George to tell him about the rabbits, tell him about all of it. And so George goes into a story about how when they get enough money, if they can just get the money, they can have this nice spread of land where Lenny can be with him, and he can tend to the rabbits, and they're going to have seeds, and they're going to be able to live by themselves and live off of the fat of the land. That is one of the phrases that is said a lot, living off the fat of the land.
Yeah.
And guys, who doesn't really want that in life? You know what I mean? Who doesn't really want something of their very own that they can have?
Yeah.
And that's what this is about. That's their dream.
Mm-hmm.
So they get to their work detail, and immediately people are harassing them. I mean, just immediately. It starts off with them immediately harassing them. The boss tells them, starts asking Lenny questions, but Lenny, he can get a little confused because, once again, he's not very bright.
Yeah.
So George does the talking for them, and they get into a big spiel about it, and they go off to work, and Candy shows them the way. Candy, by the way, is a character who only has one hand, and he's got this old pitiful dog.
Yeah.
That he doesn't have the heart to put out of his misery.
It's actually explained in the book because I read the book in English class because we were. It was one of the main things you read in Branson, at least, for your freshman year. I know that person or a student who goes to Spokane, who goes to my church, she's a sophomore, and they read of Mice and Men this year. So, really,
it's kind of a required reading. I remember reading the book when I was about his age, too. for high school. You know,
And next year as a sophomore, we'll be reading To Kill a Mockingbird.
so we have to talk about the cinematography, especially. I'll get back to the story in a minute.
I'll talk about it, guys. This is revolutionary because this film is kind of revolutionary because it took some techniques that weren't really popular at the time. Like there's jump cuts, there's fadings, there's pan out shots, there's all sorts of stuff that you wouldn't see otherwise in a film for this era, because you have this pan out shot, which was also made and popular with the Wizard of Oz, Dad. You know, where they're walking down, where they're like dancing, where they're skipping
Which
down
came
the
out
yellow
the
brick.
same year.
Yeah.
I mean, 1939 was a great year for film. So let's get back to the story for a moment. And
and the reason why they were able to do so many of these revolutionary ideas for cinematography is that it was made by United Artists, who were also the people behind Citizen Kane.
yes, 12 years later, because Citizen Kane came out in 1951.
Yeah.
But let's get back to it. Like I said, they then have an altercation with the boss's son, who runs the owner's son, who kind of oversees things. Curly. He's a small man, probably about 5'2".
He has the Napoleon complex.
With a giant ego, and seems to be really mad at big men. And we can't forget that Lenny is a great big strong bull of a man, able to do about anything that doesn't require thinking, is the way that George puts it. Is that he's able to do anything, and that George has to look out for him. And he tells the man at first that he's his cousin, and that's kind of a lie, but it got him through, whatnot. And you can tell at times that George does get a little impatient with Lenny, because Lenny can't quite grasp what's going on quick enough. Curly, who's the man with the Napoleon complex, he also has a wife who really doesn't want to be there. She explains that she basically just married him to get away from her domineering mother, more or less.
Yeah, and she wanted to become an actress.
But she's left all alone as a result there. And she tries and tries and tries to really have any kind of human contact, really. But the boys at the ranch don't want it because it's going to bring problems to them. So they're constantly shooing her away, because Curly's the jealous type. He wants to know where she's at, what she's doing at all times. Only he can't keep track of her. So he keeps getting frustrated and angry a lot. And it gets him into a bad situation.
Later on in the film.
So they're working and whatnot, and they're trying to build towards what they have. And they mention there's Curly. There's Candy. The man with the one hand who got it caught, and they put him to tending swamp or something. But as soon as
he's a swamper, he sweeps the bunkhouse. That's what a swamper is, Dad, during this time period.
So
you're welcome for all the people out there.
He has this old dog, and it smells, and it's hardly no use to anybody.
And it's stiff to rheumatism.
And people are complaining about it. And there's one particular scene that just, it tells you it's a foreshadow. This movie foreshadows too. It's one thing I don't think they were really doing back then either, was doing foreshadowing in advance what was going to happen. The parallel there.
The story itself is a foreshadow, and that's what Steinbeck had always imagined it to be.
So they're talking about the dog and how it needs to be put out of his misery. And a stranger basically convinces him, hey, if you can't do it, I'll do it for him. So they take the dog out. And there's silence for a long while. Crippling silence, basically, of what's happening. And they try to break up the tension with George offering to play rummy. And then you hear the But this is not before that they're pretty much told that that dog's old and useless and it can't hardly do nothing and you'd be doing it a favor. Which they kind of were doing it a favor, you know, because it was doing nothing but suffering. A euthanasia, if you will. So things progress, and Lenny asked George to talk about the rabbits again. And Candy's laying there, asleep. But he stirs at the notion of it. That there's this idea, this dream, that for $600 they can have this incredible spread of land. And they can do all the things they imagine with a windmill and pigeons and rabbits and seeds and being able to till and nobody telling them what to do, and that if they could have people working for them, and if they don't like them, they could tell them to get off the land. And it's just an incredible, inspiring situation. Candy hears it.
It's like,
he says, I'm old, I'm no good, but I got $300. I got a little more coming at the end of the month. I can help you guys. If you let me come and wash dishes and do whatever, we can be our own people. We can be our own bosses.
yeah,
And they're so, so close.
yeah, you really wish, if you know the story, you really wish that the film would just end there, fade to black, roll credits, and then fade in again, and you see them that they're working, and it's a happily ever after.
So then, you know, there's all this tension from Curly and his wife. And his wife keeps running around going, ain't nobody wanting to talk to me, and basically being a little brat in a way, because she chose her fate. She chose her destiny. She chose the troubles that she put herself in. In fact, Slim tells her as much. Slim is basically the head ranch hand who kind of understands the relationship between George and Lenny and why Lenny is who he is and what it is. He's sympathetic towards their cause.
Yeah.
Pretty much the only one who is, because all the rest of them poke fun of him. So then,
Except for Candy.
Curly comes into the bunkhouse looking for his wife. They all tell him, we ain't seen her. We don't know where she's at. You should keep a better eye on her. They start laughing. Lenny starts laughing. Curly gets upset about it. He goes, what you laughing for? He starts laying into him with a left and a right and a left and a right. And George is taking it in the face. Well, Lenny's taking it in the face over and over and over. And he tells George, make him stop it. George tells him, you got to do something about it. You got to protect yourself. And one more time with the right. Boom. Lenny catches him. Crushes his hand.
And then he squeezes his hand by crushing it.
And George has to tell him over and over and over and over and over to drop it. To drop him, to stop it. Hand's broke. It's crushed. Slim tells him, you better tell your dad that you got it caught in a machine. Or we're going to tell everybody what you've just done. And so, a little bit of time passes. Curly's wife eventually comes to the Crooks' room where Lenny had already been. She comes in there. Now Lenny had come in there to tend to his pup that had been given to him by Slim. And Crooks basically says to George, suppose that...
It's Lenny, but okay.
Crooks says to Lenny, suppose George ain't around. Suppose he never comes back from town. This gets Lenny upset. He says, what you supposing for? He says, I ain't supposing nothing. But I ain't got nothing. They won't let me in the bunkhouse because I'm black. I'm out here all alone by myself.
Reading books and stuff, but books aren't no good. A guy has to somebody to talk to. If he has nobody to talk to, a guy gets sick. You see?
So you see all these parallels, all these things, all this emotion. Everything is displayed out there. So then, Lenny comes in. And now they had made a big stir about how Curly had come in too and had Candy had come in too and had made a big stir with Lenny about how they could make some money off the rabbits. And Crooks tries to tell him, hey, this is a fool's dream. But then he understands that George has something and he knows something. And he basically tells him, look, I can do things. I can be a part of this. I want to be somebody. I want something. I want to be with you guys. I want to not be alone, basically. So they're this close. They're this close, guys.
Something in the book that they don't mention in both versions of the movie is there's a really racist line in the book where Curly's wife says, "Now listen here, you N-word. I can get you strung up with a tree faster than anybody here can."
Because she demands to know who broke Curly's hand.
And then afterwards she leaves.
She figures it out.
Yeah.
She leaves right at about the time that George is basically telling her, hey, get on out of here. We don't need you here. And he's going to slap her, but then Curly's dad has the whip. Now, I don't know what the implication was there, but maybe George actually took a whipping. Could have been. So anyways, things progress, and Curly tells his wife, hey, we're through. Get on out of here. And she tells him, she's like, oh, you want me to tell your dad what really happened and whatnot? But then she goes back and she's in the barn and she sees Lenny. And Lenny has unfortunately killed his pup. He didn't mean to. He never did anything out of meanness. He can't. Just like he didn't understand why Crooks wasn't allowed in the bunkhouse. Because he doesn't know what racism is. He doesn't understand these things. So then, he is conversating with her and he tells her what happened and whatnot. And they start to talk about lace and frilly things and how nice and soft it is. And to the actress's credit, though, she then gives a pretty good performance herself. In that she tells why she is the way that she is, basically. Her dad was a drunk that basically left them, and she was left to her mom, and they were always fighting, and she had to get away from it, and it's understandable. That's understandable. And it kind of explains the bratty attitude that she has in the movie.
Yeah. And in the book, there's no mention of her dad, but there is mention of her mom, and her mom was very overbearing, and then she had an opportunity to get out with the whole being an actress thing. But then that doesn't work out because of Lenny.
Yeah. Well, Lenny, he says he wish he had some lace that some velvet that his aunt had give to him. And one thing leads to another, and she kind of shrieks, and then he basically, suffocates her in this version. And then he understands that he did a bad thing. And George had told him to go hide in the brush if he ever got in trouble again, where they had camped before. Mm-hmm. So, Candy finds what happened, and Lenny runs off. And then George comes in, and he basically tells him, hey, will you give me a few minutes so that we can explain the situation a little bit, and you can make like you haven't seen her yet and come out and whatnot. Well, Curly, he's still upset. Him and the boys, they discover the body, which, by the way, they never actually really show a dead body due to the Hays Code. But hey guys, sometimes in movies it's show don't tell, sometimes it's tell don't show, and in this case it was tell don't show. Mm-hmm. So Curly rounds up his posse, and they're going to hunt this man down. And George basically asks Slim, hey, what if we can catch him and bring him in? And they're like, well, if they catch him, and they're going to string him up and keep him locked up in a cage. And do you really want that? There's only one way to get Lenny out of this.
And then that's when George
And
pulls
so-
the gun, and
Yeah.
Slim nods in agreement, and then George puts it away, and then we get this awesome pan out shot, guys. It's
Yep.
so good. It's
So it leads to the posse's hunting him. And Lenny knows that he's done a bad thing. And George catches up with him. And he tells him, is that why we can't go hunting with them boys? Because I did a bad thing? He doesn't quite understand what actually happened. And then Lenny asks him to tell him about the rabbits one more time. So he does. And he tells him, look out over that river. You can see it. You can see it.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes,
So
I
sad.
can see it, George. I
And
can.
he's like, we're gonna have pigs and chickens and stuff,
And the emotional build-up.
and then George he then tells Lenny, he's like, Lenny, look out over there, and he continues to tell him, and he puts, and by the way, again, because of the Hays Code at the time, which literally they could not make anything at the time, but because of the production code, the Hays Code, he basically put like this cloth over the gun so it doesn't show the shot. And so then how they geniusly did this is awesome. Is they pan over to George and it shows George shooting the gun. They don't show Lenny's body due to the fact that, again, they couldn't show it at the time due to the Hays Code.
Now, so after all of that, he pulls the trigger. And that's that. And they look down, and then the sheriff basically needs to know. He stops him. He gives him the gun. There's a nice nature shot. The end.
Mm-hmm.
Now, guys, it's an emotional roller coaster. So, check it out. You definitely can check it out on HBO Max. It's also available on YouTube as well. You can also find it on DVD, and I'm pretty sure also Blu-ray as well, the original version. So,
Okay, so real quick, before we get into our outro here, I just want to compare the endings of the two versions real quick. So the original version, there's this emotional build-up to that one shot, and it's so sad. You're just like, I want to cry. In the remake, which, don't get me wrong, the remake's fine. Remake's okay. There are certain elements they did change. Like, it isn't suffocation that kills Curly's wife. It's a basic neck break. He accidentally breaks her neck, and that's how she's killed. Anyways, the two endings is just completely, it's just like, no. Because that shot, it's not, there isn't no emotional build-up in the remake. It's just a simple, Lenny, sit down here, look over the river. He doesn't even go on about the speech, like in the ending. It's just a boom! And it just shocked me. I'm like, what? No! That's not how it was like in the book.
So, guys, final rating for this is definitely a 5 out of 5.